everyone. I'm the editor of Wetpixel. I'd like to introduce you to our regular correspondent from down south, Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Adam. Yep,
Um,
here I am in balmy Cambridgeshire. Yeah, in October.
For those of us that are joining us from abroad, probably don't know that there's a great it's not an animosity, is it? There's a great difference between the north and south of the UK, and we're keen to emphasise the differences. Anyway,
I have to say that where I live now, I've considered the north for most of my life. So having sort of lived very far south.
There we go. Well,
Mm.
what we thought we'd chat about today, or what I thought I'd ask Alex today, is about one of the problems that happens to people on trips, and happens to people on, and that's what we would do if we flood a strobe. So, Alex, how do you deal with strobe floods?
I think as we talked about this when we talked about this principle when we're dealing with housings, is that a flood on a trip, your priority is about maintaining your photographic capabilities. A flood, when you may be just doing a day's diving at home, or a flood, at the end of a trip, it's about looking after the gear to get it serviced afterwards. I think there's a slight difference in the two. And I think I want to focus on how we keep ourselves shooting, because that's actually, can be value. You've spent all this money on an expensive trip. You have a major piece of equipment go down. What can you do to maintain your photographic capabilities? The first thing I would say, is always to remind people that a huge amount of underwater photography can be done really, really well with a single strobe. So if you have a normal 2-strobe system and one of your strobes goes down, don't get overly depressed about it. Embrace the fact that you can do more photography with a single strobe, but be aware of what you can and can't do. 2 strobes, particularly for wide angle shooting, become really critical when you're really, really on top of the subject. You need those 2 strobes to get the light round your housing onto the subject. As soon as you back away a little bit, it's very easy to light that scene with a single strobe. Macro photography, very, very super macro, you often need 2 strobes, because again, you're trying to get the light round the front of those super macro accessories onto the subject. But most macro photography we can do really well with single strobe. And if you are forced into single strobe shooting, it can be really good to embrace it. Is actually say, okay, this trip I'm going to take all the really cool single strobe shots that I've probably been too lazy to shoot because I had 2 strobes before. So that would be also part of my advice, is if you do get reduced down to a single strobe, embrace that first of all. See it as an opportunity rather than it's ruined your trip and you get all depressed about it and you don't take any good pictures for the rest of the trip. Now, most strobes are, this is my main strobes, which are my CCAM strobes. Most strobes are completely sealed, except for where you put the batteries in and out. And then that battery compartment is sealed from the rest of the strobe. So most strobe floods occur flooding through the battery compartment into the battery compartment in the back of the strobe. And that usually only kills the battery compartment. The batteries that are in there, if they get exposed to water, will usually be total toast. And they're not going to be recoverable. But the strobe itself is likely to be completely fine. And if it's not working, it's probably not working because the contacts within there have got dirty. And most strobes have contacts at the base of the battery compartment and also on the cap of the battery compartment. And you need to clean up both ends in order to make it work again. And so the main thing to do is the main focus of a strobe flood is cleaning up all those contacts. So first of all, this area in here, that can be washed out with fresh water to clean it all up. And then you can work about cleaning those contacts up. Now, in the field, you may not have everything available to you that you would want. But if you have got some sort of abrasive to clean those contacts, that can be great. And I take these little brushes, contact cleaning brushes, with me on trips because they're very light, very small. There's I think there's an iron one, a copper one, and a felt one for cleaning contacts. And they give you an abrasiveness. Also, because they're long, they're great for sticking down into strobes and cleaning those contacts, because even on any strobe, the length of that chamber is at least the length of a AA battery. Sometimes 2, but when it's 1, these are great for reaching down to the bottom and cleaning those contacts. If you don't have something like this, a wooden toothpick can be really good as well. That wood can be really good for chipping away at it. And in extreme situations, and very successfully, I've used Coca-Cola as a contact cleaning. It's going to seem silly, but here's a picture of me joking around cleaning contacts of a strobe. But this strobe did come back to life after cleaning it this way. It wasn't working. We put the Coke in. The Coke cleaned up those contacts. We washed the coke out, washed the strobe then with fresh water, left it to dry in the sun so it got nice and dry, and then it started working again. And it wasn't working before that.
Another option from Coke, again, obviously Coke's probably easier to get, but vinegar does the same effect. Again, exactly the same process. Vinegar is a really good thing for cleaning up electrical contacts too. So stick some vinegar and leave it in there for quarter of an hour. Again,
obviously, if you have official contact cleaner, much better. Yeah. Mine's bigger than yours, Adam.
It's been said before.
If you do, but obviously, being, I don't tend to take this aerosol with me on trips ever. I mean, so, but it's, at home, obviously, something like this is much better. But in extremis, those things are really, really, make a really big difference.
One of the things I was just going to mention
is that most strobes, when they flood in the back part of the battery compartment, it doesn't flood the rest of the strobe. So your goal is really getting those contacts clean and work again. If you open the front of your strobe and you see moisture or you see dirty, rusty liquid, obviously the whole thing's flooded through. And then the best thing you can do is get fresh water in there and get it dry and see what can be fixed afterwards. But probably it's going to be a case of completely new electronics throughout the whole strobe if it floods through and there's water in the front part.
There are limited options, I think, once you've got water in the front part.
It's usually whole new internals.
In terms of a little bit about flood prevention for a minute, and I appreciate that's not specifically what we're talking about here, but with the in-on style strobes, very popular, obviously. The sealing O-ring is this yellow O-ring you can see here. And I've removed the battery cap for simplicity's sake. But one of the things that you can do with these is as you put the top on, the top is clear. And that allows you to actually visibly check that the O-ring is in place and hasn't extruded itself out. Sometimes if these are under lubricated, they actually push out. So by having actually the clear top, you can actually see the O-ring. So it's more to do with flood prevention than dealing with the actual flood. But it's always a good idea if you have the in-on style strobes with these clear tops to have a look at the O-ring before you get in the water. Sorry, it's a slight digression.
The way, actually, Adam, on the in-on, because I think it's quite a common. I mean, most strobes don't flood because of failures; they flood because of human error. Yeah. When I put the cap on my in-ons, I think they extrude as well when you push unevenly on the cap. So what I do is I hold the in-on like that, and I hold the cap on flat with my thumb, and then I screw it like that. So that you're using both hands. So one hand is holding the in-on, and my thumb is coming around on top, and then I screw like that. And what that does is it makes the cap go on really square and stops it pushing the O-ring out.
The other trick that helps as well is to use a very small amount of lubricant inside the sealing surface on the cap, and that just helps it slip around the O-ring rather than grabbing it and potentially popping it out of the groove. So tiny
really good
lubricant on there. I think maybe it's worth mentioning that with other strobes, so regardless of brand, they all have O-rings, and make sure that you've got, again, it's the usual sort of O-rings, don't put too much lubricant on, but there needs to be sufficient lubricant to ensure that the O-rings can slide into their sealing surface and don't catch and extrude. Right, anyway, so that's prevention rather than dealing.
Yeah, no, but all really, really related. And then the other thing that can stop strobes messing around is particularly with electronic cables. And I know these days the majority of photographers are using fiber optic cables. Is electronic cables can flood, and that can stop your strobes firing.
Or generally, it can make your strobes fire randomly, can't it? That's the other thing.
Yeah, if your strobes are behaving strangely, the most likely place for a problem is not the strobe is flooded, but there's water somewhere in these contacts. It can even be a drip when you were putting it together. It may not have flooded through. And getting these cleaned up, again, using similar methods, contact cleaner, even if it needs to be, the Coca-Cola trick. The wooden toothpick is very good for cleaning inside some of these holes, or using the brushes if you've got bikes sticking up. And again, this is a trigger, but the inside, the little points in there, again, getting in and amongst those with a toothpick, working very gently to clean them up, can get things working in the field. Again, Coca-Cola, or if you've got contact cleaner, even better, squirt of that inside.
So I'm going to digress. What triggers that then, Alex? That's a fascinating thing.
This is if you watch our strobe trigger episode, this is actually Hedwig's original trigger fish. This is actually a pre-production one where he just embedded the circuitry in a piece of resin so we could test it. And this was the test one, and it still works. All those years later, it's an original triggerfish trigger that they sent me years ago. I mean, I wanted to find it for the episode, but couldn't find it, and then I found it. It's been sitting on my desk ever since. So yeah, good that you asked.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, yeah, but cleaning those contacts is really the key to that. If you have spare sync cords, the first thing to do if you're having flash triggering issues, if you've got two strobes and one of them is playing up, the first thing I would always do is unplug the cables from the back of the strobes and switch the cables over just to see if the problem is strobe related or cable related. And 9 times out of 10, it will be cable related. Then swap the plugs at the other end over. And then you can see if it's being caused by the cable itself or the plug on the housing. And you typically it'll be the plug on the housing that's causing the issue. I actually have on my housings, I have 3 sync plugs on them. So when I'm using it, so I've constantly got a spare there. It's not wired in, but the cable's on the inside, and then I can connect it up on the inside of the housing just on a circuit board plug. So I always have a spare one on my housing anyway. And I can always move it on the housing because they're just screwed. They're just screwed in. They're not difficult to fix up on a trip. So that can be, that's a good thing if you are an electronic strobe user. And my main strobes, my CCAM are electronic only. So I like to have that spare plug all the time on my housing. It's a very small thing to travel with. If it's bolted into one of the spare sockets on the housing, it's there to be used either in that position or moved in place of one of the ones on the housing. But yeah, that's the normal cause of the issue. Sorry, Adam.
If you're using fiber optic triggering, it's always a good idea to pull the fiber optic cable off on the housing end and then have a look and make sure that you've got light coming out of the housing when you trigger the shutter. And that allows you to, because the internal circuit boards have batteries and sometimes they go wrong too. So obviously if you're not getting light out of the housing, then you can troubleshoot what's going on in the housing rather than the cable itself. It's important to trace it back. So many times I think people say my strobes aren't working, they assume something with the strobes, but actually sometimes it can be something to do with something in the housing as well. And it's in the same way. If you're getting output, you can actually do the same by then plug the cable in and have a look at the other cable at the other end of the cable. Don't actually look at it into your eye; it's not very good for you. But if you look at it at an oblique angle, you can actually see the light triggering in the end of the fiber as well. It's a good way of tracing to make sure that there is a signal through it.
Yeah, and overall, I'm always amazed at how reliable strobes are, considering how much energy is going through them hundreds and hundreds of times in a harsh environment, sealed from the elements with all that energy contained within this box. I think that underwater strobes overall are very reliable, and they're certainly all much more reliable than they ever were 10, 15 years ago.
I think one last point that I'd like to make, and this is probably a bit of a public health warning, be very, very careful if you ever open a strobe up. So if you're in the field and you've got a problem with the strobe and you decide to actually go into the inside of the strobe, there's a capacitor in there that can produce a really, really nasty shock if you're not careful. So what you really want to be doing is making sure that you do it safely. Certainly, I have to say for myself, I don't think I'd open up the front end of a strobe in the field ever. And I'd probably send it back to the manufacturer, but just be careful if you do so go in the front. There are dangers associated with doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, yeah. For me, it's if it's flooded through from the battery compartment, you're going to wash it with fresh water and you're going to leave it well alone so you can get it fixed. But it's not something you're going to be able to fix in the field anyway, to be honest.
No, true enough. Yeah. Thank you, Alex. Lots of good advice there. Where can we see some of your wonderful flash photography?
Well, probably good to follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I'm Alex Mustard1 on Instagram and Alex_Mustard on Twitter. They're good places to see what I'm up to at the moment.
Excellent. Yeah, we should go there and have a look. I'd like to thank our sponsor for today's episode, which is Bunaken Oasis in Indonesia. And I'd like to thank you all for watching. I'd like to thank, and I'd like to, please feel free to add comments, make suggestions, give your advice on flooded strobes or questions about doing so in the comment section below. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you soon.